The trial of Toby Ziegler. We are almost ready to begin, but as many of you know, we were holding off and allowing that opportunity to get the volunteers who were in the room who want to be a part of this. So what we need are five volunteers to join us in this festivity. So the Honorable Judge Mercer is presiding and has the instructions on what to do. So what we want to do is get those 5 volunteers to come up. The things that we need are...
We need a prosecutor, defense attorney. Somebody's going to be Toby. Someone is going to be Andy. Andy and Toby are going to be our defense witnesses. And I need a CJ and I need a Cregg Brock to be our prosecution witnesses.
Okay, so those are the roles that are out there. So how many volunteers do we have who'd like to be a part of this? Because if it's 5 or fewer, then we're pretty set. Good. So we have these 3 right here. Come on up. Come on down. Can we, good. So you come right over here. You guys confab in the corner. In the corner where you guys can all talk about what you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right, so we need 2 more people? Yeah. 2 more people. 1 more people right here. Come on down. And 1 more right here. Fantastic. Great. So you all go over there. Make sure you've got your parts. Andy, you're in it too. Yeah. Make sure you got your parts. Okay, so for those of you who are here, what we want to do is, all of them are doing those things, right? And they're going to present evidence, they're going to present the case in this kind of fun and interactive way, hopefully. And what we want you to do is be the jury to decide what's going on here. There are multiple questions on the table. The first question, as we had talked about, is, did Toby do it? But there's also, should Toby have done it? Like those types of questions, the ethical dilemmas are part of any trial when we're doing it right. So, hopefully they will have just a moment there. Does anybody have, coming into this, a thought? Yes?
Okay, so my thought is that, and I don't have anything like strong in the series to support this, just my own personal opinion based on the character. He didn't do it, he was taking the fall for someone else.
That is your thought, okay.
No idea who that person is, but that is my personal opinion, and I'm absolutely convinced of.
Okay, excellent. And if everybody can, this is going to be a popular thing, obviously, in a fairly small room, so just let everybody come in and fill in where their seats. All right. So, any other opening thoughts before we get started? I'm basically doing voir dire here. I'm actually seeing if you're actually a legitimate jury. Sounds like maybe you already have ideas about whether you think that Toby did it, or yes.
I know how Richard Schiff feels. We all know how Richard Schiff feels about the storyline. But I actually do think that Toby would have done it. I just think he would have owned up to it right away. He would have let it sit for a really long time.
Yes.
And have the cloud fall on CJ.
Right. So, are you guys ready? Well, we don't have a lot of time. We have 1 minute. 1 minute.
Okay.
Okay. Yes.
So my theory is Toby took the fall for 2 reasons. 1, he knew who did it. And 2, to protect CJ. My theory of who did it was another person who we never saw on screen, only referenced in Toby's backstory, his sister-in-law, or his lady brother, would have had or could have had that information from her late husband. Toby protecting her and protecting both the Bartlett and Manera Santos administration. Yes.
So, does anyone think that Toby... Oh, yes, what's up? Oh, yeah, okay. All right. We can... You ready? Yes. It is my laptop.
Access because I have an idea to make this
What do you need for this? It's on the internet, I think.
Well, thank you, sir.
Okay, so again, if you can stand just where we can hear when you present your point.
Yeah, so I just want to say, so I put money in during the Kickstarter, but then schedule get busy. you know, and you prioritize vacation days. And there was part of me that was like wavering as to whether I should come this weekend. And when this came on the programming schedule, I knew I had to be here because I don't have an idea. Like I.
Oh, good. You're legitimately on the jury. We have our first actual vote. Come on down. And now the trial of Toby Ziegler.
That was pretty much what we were going to say. No, I'm just kidding. Hey, I'm Jerri.
I'm Ben.
We are your White House communication staff directors and people who are here.
Exactly.
And we are so excited for this particular panel. This is, if you hadn't heard the 15 million times, is the trial of Toby Ziegler.
Yes. And for this gentleman who asked, did Toby do something? Yes, he did.
No, I was just trying
It's
to get
alleged.
And we're going to figure out once
Alleged.
and for all whether he did or didn't do it with our
And-
mock trial.
This is super cool because we're going to do this and we actually have a real life lawyer who's going to be playing our judge.
Absolutely. So to set things off appropriately, all rise.
Thank you, everyone. You may be seated.
For the Honorable Judge
Jennifer Mercer.
No, wait.
Got it. All right. Read the. As a reminder of the charges leveled against Mr. Tobias Ziegler, Communications Director of the White House, I shall now read to you from the official Wikipedia page of In the episode, Things Fall Apart, the International Space Station develops a critical oxygen leak. With no civilian shuttles available to perform a rescue mission in time, a 3-person crew finds itself trapped aboard the ISS, International Space Station. While the president contemplates rescue options, CJ becomes aware of the possibility that a secret military shuttle could be prepared in time to rescue the crew. However, this would involve revealing the shuttle's existence, particularly as one of the ISS crew is a Russian military officer. CJ shares her speculation with several senior White House staff, including Toby. This information is leaked to reporter Greg Brock from the New York Times, which triggers a full-scale investigation. In the episode, Mr. Frost, Toby admits to CJ that he leaked the classified information, which estranges the two. He knew that if the military shuttle existence became public knowledge, the public would demand the safe return of the astronauts, which is what ultimately occurred. It is implied that his actions are related to the recent suicide of his brother, who was also an astronaut, we remember. White House counsel Oliver Babish debriefs Toby until his lawyer ended the interview. Toby reveals that he discussed the possible existence of the shuttle with CJ, but does not state that CJ initiated the conversation. Toby offers his resignation to Bartlett, but Bartlett does not accept the resignation because he must dismiss Toby for cause. Babish waits with Toby before he's escorted out of the White House, saying that someone should at least thank Toby for his years of service and wait with him to soften the blow. As we remember, Toby did attend Leo's funeral, but stayed in the back to avoid press attention. He was unable to go to Leo's gravesite at Arlington National Cemetery because the press circus in attendance. Later, CJ is at an impasse about what to do after the administration's time ends and visits Toby. That's what happens in the show. Your Honor?
All right. So this is how we're going to do things for those of you in the audience, for my lovely volunteers who have agreed to participate in this. This is all going to be very off the cuff. They are not reading from a script. The way we're going to do this is each attorney is going to have 5 minutes to make an opening statement. There will be 5 minutes for each witness. We have 2 witnesses for each side. I've been informed by defense counsel that Mr. Ziegler does wish to testify in his own defense, waiving his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. We'll see whether that's a good choice or not. That being said, after all the witnesses have finished their testimony, we will give 10 minutes to closing arguments, and we will hopefully reach a break within our allotted time. So with that being said, prosecution, I'll hear from you first.
Good evening. We're here today to discuss Toby Ziegler and the leak that occurred regarding the secret space shuttle and the ISS astronauts on board a space shuttle that needed a rescue. Now, Toby's brother, David, am I right? He had recently committed suicide. He was very sick with cancer, as I understand. I'm very sorry about that. From my understanding, Toby has been very, very angry, very upset about his brother's recent departure. I know that Toby's has been very close with his brother. His brother's been an astronaut with NASA for a very long time, and he doesn't really get a lot of time to see him or to talk to him. And his brother's sudden departure has really shaken him. During this time, he has acted quite irrationally at his place of work in the West Wing with his coworkers and with the president. He has been known in his time at the White House to cross the line with the president. He's gotten in his face on a number of occasions. He did actually, if my sources are correct, resign once before from the position after getting into a heated battle with the president, to which he disagreed with him, to the point where he felt he could no longer work there anymore. So this is a notable trend with Mr. Ziegler. His heated temper has really caused a lot of problems for him. Toby Ziegler has, in the past, come upon some very sensitive information. He did discover that the president had a very serious degenerative illness before anybody else did. He did act out irrationally then as well. He hasn't really been great at keeping secrets when they involve national security or when it comes to protecting his fellow co-workers and friends in the West Wing. Now, imagine this confluence of events. He's very angry and upset at his brother. He feels betrayed. And he is vehemently disagreeing with the way that the administration is handling this disastrous issue with the space shuttle. There are 3 astronauts, 2 Americans and 1 Russian, who are stuck on the shuttle. All of the U.S. shuttles that are currently known about are undergoing various stages of maintenance. He knows about another shuttle that could be used, but the administration did not want Russia to know about this shuttle. Now, he even cited to CJ, as my reports reflect, that his brother was incredibly, incredibly loyal and very good at his job and would die before he would ever give up the secret. Now, perhaps Toby, due to his anger, could have wanted to stick it to his brother somehow. When you're emotional, you can do a lot of things. And it's possible due to that, he went against his better judgments.
1 minute, counselor.
Against the better angels in his head. And decided to leak this story, knowing full well that it would harm his relationship with the president and with his fellow co-workers, one of whom is here today to speak as witness, Claudia Jean Cregg. Now, in closing, I would like to remind everyone that a leak of this nature is massive and even if Toby may not have meant to do it, even if it was an emotional outburst, it was an accident, and he might have regretted it, consequences must be handed down. Thank you.
Defense counsel will hear from you next.
Thank you, Judge. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and may it please the court, the prosecution's told you a very pretty story. But that's all it is. It's a nice story. In fact, it's the kind of story that only an Academy Award-winning screenwriter could draft. Let's talk about the facts. The fact number one is that the government bears the burden of proof here. Mr. Ziegler doesn't need to talk to you at all. The government bears the burden to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Ziegler was the person who released the high security information. And while they have their ideas, they didn't bring you very much proof. Yes, if you ask around, you're going to find out that Mr. Ziegler has a bit of a firecracker temper. He's been known to yell and occasionally, let's be honest here, broken the occasional hippo coffee mug. But Mr. Ziegler is also known to be a man of values and integrity. He's a team player. In fact, if we spent a lot of time on his history as a political operative, we would find out that President Barro was the only winner he's ever worked for. And that tells us that Mr. Ziegler is a team player. So yes, there was a leak of high security information. And yes, there was a feeding frenzy in the press, as well as several investigations started to identify that leak. And it was bogging down the administration. It was interfering with the people's business. And in effort to get the politics of the nation and the people's business back on track, Mr. Ziegler did what he has done professionally for many years, and he took one for the team. Beyond that discussion with Ms. Cregg, where he brought her a solution to the problem, the government has shown you no evidence. They have not met their burden. They're not able to meet their burden. They won't meet their burden. After the evidence, we'll be having another one of these conversations, and I'll be reminding you of what their burden to prove is. Not that Mr. Ziegler, although he does love a great deal of pie, can be a very difficult man to work with. He certainly can. But that Mr. Ziegler actually broke the law.
Thank you, Counselor. State, call your first witness.
My first witness will be Claudia Jean Cregg. Do I sit up there?
Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalty of perjury to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth?
I swear. Ms. Cregg, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're a busy woman. Now, the first thing I want to ask you is just establish a timeline of events here. So when did you first become aware of this situation on the space shuttle with these 3 astronauts?
Shortly before the public did. I didn't realize that there was a military shuttle until after. I was cleared to know it, but I did not realize until after the problems on the shuttle started.
Sure, absolutely. And when you became aware of the situation and you knew that two of these astronauts were Americans and one was Russian. Did that alter the administration's views on how they were going to handle the situation?
I was trying to figure out the best way to do it, but once the president made a decision, I respected his decision, and the Secretary of Defense did have more problems because there was a Russian, but as the Chief of Staff, I was following the president's orders.
And what were President Bartlett's orders?
To not send up the space shuttle, or at least at that point to keep it a secret from the American public.
Great. And in regards to the 3 space shuttles that were publicly known about, what stages of maintenance were they in? Were they at all ready to go out? What were their conditions?
None of them were ready within the time frame that we needed because it was a very short time frame. The only space shuttle that we needed to get was a secret military shuttle.
Thank you. To segue a bit, what is your relationship with Mr. Ziegler?
We've been friends for even a long time before the Bartlett White House, but we worked together for 7 years by the time of this.
So you're very close. You've known
He
each other a
recruited
long
me into working on behalf of Leo McGarry.
Great, and were you privy to his brother David's suicide before the news broke about this space shuttle?
Yes, he did not talk about his brother that much, and I didn't even know about that he had a brother for several years. But by the time I found out, I didn't know about the suicide, and I didn't know that they were back in touch.
And, to the best of your knowledge, what would you qualify Mr. Ziegler's emotional state as during the conversations you had with him?
I thought that he was doing his job very well, but there were a couple of instances that made me nervous about his state. For instance, he
Objection. Basis relevance.
Goes to... goes to the mental state of the witness and his ability to make decisions.
I will counsel proceed.
Thank you.
He did have one fight with Joshua Lyman in the White House that made me question.
Objection.
Basis.
Prior bad acts, Judge.
The witness has brought this up. I didn't question her. She can proceed, I think.
Judge, I'd like to request for a jury instruction regarding the relevance of other possible bad acts.
Tell you what, I'll let you make your point in closing, but I'm going to allow the question.
So, Ms. Cregg, during the time that you were all working on getting these astronauts home safe and sound, what was Mr. Ziegler doing during this time? What was his workload like?
It was a heavy workload. His workload as communications director was always heavy, but we were short-staffed at the time, so it was even heavier than normal.
Great. And did he seem at all stressed by the amount of work? You did mention this altercation with Mr. Lyman.
1 minute, counsel.
Was anybody else concerned about his state of mind? Did they come to you expressing any concern?
I don't think anybody had any concern that I didn't mention, and I don't think his workload was like overly. I think he was okay with his workload because he was taking on, he was volunteering for another campaign, so I think his workload was doable. I feel like his brother might have been the stress, and I'm just telling what I was observing, but I think his workload was okay.
Sure. So a possibility that his brother could have been a major stressor during this time.
Yes.
Objection. Now counsel is testifying.
That portion will be stricken from the record.
On to defense counsel.
Any cross?
Yes, Judge. Ms. Cregg, can you tell us, prior to Mr. Ziegler's alleged confession to you, who was the #1 suspect to be the leak?
I was never told this, but I assumed that I was. In fact, I'm pretty clear that I was.
Okay. So, and the position you held at that time was Chief of Staff?
Yes.
To President Bartlett?
Yes.
So is it fair to say that had the Chief of Staff been arrested or formally investigated, it would have done serious damage to the remaining time President Bartlett was in the White House?
I think it would have been the same as if the communication director was investigated.
You don't believe that your position was of more value?
I believe we were all a team. You talked about the importance of team. We were all a team.
Do you think that the announcement that Mr. Ziegler was the leak brought the issue or the political furor of the leak to a rapid closure?
Yes. I definitely say.
Is it safe to say that after that announcement and after Mr. Ziegler was fired, that the administration was able to better focus on the issues of the day?
It took several weeks, but after about 2 or 3 weeks, it did die down and we were able to talk about the issues of the day again.
One more question, Counsel.
No, thank you, Judge. I'm done.
All right, Ms. Cregg is excused. Next witness, prosecutor.
I call on Congresswoman Wyatt.
Okay. Excuse me, Judge. I was not aware that Congresswoman Wyatt was a state's witness, and I'd like to remind the court and the prosecutor that Congresswoman Wyatt was previously married to Mr. Ziegler, so any discussion of things that happened during the course of their marriage is privileged.
Yes. All right, well, here's what I'm going to do. My understanding was that Ms. Wyatt was going to testify for the defense, so I'll actually permit you to examine her first. And then I will allow the state to ask any follow-up questions, perhaps in a more cross-examination sort of posture, depending on her testimony. Go ahead, defense.
Congresswoman Wyatt, thank you very much for joining us today. How long would you say you've known Mr. Ziegler?
About 20 years.
And during that time, would it be fair to characterize him as a man of very high principles?
Absolutely. He's one of the most ethical men that I've ever met.
And does his devotion to his principle occasionally place him on the unpopular side of an argument?
Yes, it has.
And if he believes that the unpopular side is the best side, is he willing to go down with his team?
I believe he would, yes.
Do you believe that he would take actions for the betterment of the team he's serving, even if it was to his own personal endangerment?
I do, and I believe that he feels very strongly that he serves at the pleasure of the president, and he would do what is necessary to preserve the presidency.
Thank you. Nothing further.
All right, prosecution.
Thank you, Congresswoman Wyatt. You and Mr. Ziegler have 2 children together, correct?
Yes.
And has Mr. Ziegler recently expressed a commitment to want to be around for the kids more often?
Yes. Yes, he has.
And has he...
Judge, excuse me, with all due respect to counsel, I'm not clear on why this is relevant.
It goes to the level of stress Mr. Ziegler might have been under and his desire to move on from his position at the White House.
Make your point quickly. We can't have this line of questioning going on forever.
To the best of your knowledge, do you believe that Mr. Ziegler had been burnt out on his work and he wished to leave the White House?
I don't believe that his current level of stress is any different from the past 7 years.
And were you aware of any disputes he may have been having with his colleagues who you are familiar with as well and are working in personal capacity?
I don't know of any unusual events, no.
Thank you. That's all.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. You may step down. Now, prosecution, I believe your final witness was going to be Mr. Brock.
Yes.
You may call him now.
I'll be holding Cregg Brock to the stand.
Under the penalty of perjury, that all testimony you were about to give is be the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Brock. What paper do you currently work for?
I work for the New York Times.
Great. And how long have you been a reporter with the Times?
I've been a reporter for the New York Times for over 2 decades.
Great. And how did you come upon this story about these astronauts in the space shuttle?
As you know, as a journalist, I do not feel like it is. I refuse to name my sources. However, if metatextual question, are we past the point where I've been to jail for this?
You've been to jail.
Okay.
We're not going to do any double jeopardy.
Okay. The information was passed me by Toby Ziegler.
Great. And, how many conversations, either face-to-face or via phone, did you have with Mr. Ziegler leading up to the leak?
2 or 3. We'd known each other for off and on. We were aware of each other before that. I'd obviously written a book about essentially that was from information that I received from the former vice president, and we'd known each other through various reasons. I would say that we were relatively familiar with each other.
Great. And during those conversations with Mr. Ziegler, was he very resistant to your questioning, or did he seem open to having conversations with you about this?
Objection. Relevance.
Goes to show that whether Mr. Ziegler was prepared to go through with this crime or whether he was seriously contemplating going against it.
I'll sustain the objection, as the vote we're here for is not his willingness to do it, but whether he did in fact do it or not. Ask your next question.
Mr. Brock, when did you get the go-ahead to release this information from Mr. Ziegler?
This would have been, I believe Mr. Ziegler felt the time was of the essence. This was soon after the situation on the International Space Station became, soon when information about that came out. It was very soon afterwards.
Thank you. Proceed to defense.
Cross.
Mr. Brock, you were incarcerated as a result of your unwillingness to name your source previously.
Yes, it was.
Isn't it true that after Mr. Ziegler's announcement to Ms. Cregg that he was responsible for the leak, that situation was resolved?
Yes.
So in fact, Mr. Ziegler's conversation with Ms. Cregg benefited you greatly.
I'm not sure I understand.
Well, absent Mr. Ziegler's conversation with Ms. Cregg,
Yes.
would you not still be subject to federal court contempt?
I could still be, yes.
Nothing further.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brock. You may step down. Defense, call your next witness.
Call Toby Ziegler, please.
Your Honor, many in the jury cannot hear back.
Mr. Ziegler, do you solemnly declare or affirm under the penalty of perjury the testimony you are about to give will be the whole truth, nothing but the truth?
So help me God, I do, Your Honor.
And Mr. Ziegler, I do wish to admonish you at this time that you do have an absolute privilege against self-incrimination under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution. Knowing this, do you still wish to proceed?
I do, Your Honor.
Okay, defense, your witness.
Mr. Ziegler, the government's story is that you were laboring under a very difficult obstacle or disability at the time the leak was made. Do you believe that to be true?
I believe that my position as a communications director of the White House carries with it a great number of responsibilities that most people do not understand or do not share. And I believe that I handled my responsibilities as capably as anyone could under those circumstances.
Ms. Cregg, Ms. Craig's testimony was that your department was sorely understaffed as a result of the Santos campaign.
Yes, that was correct. My top deputy began to be in the employ of the Santos campaign, and my number one spokesperson had herself become the White House chief of staff. So yes, we were understaffed.
But you don't believe that you were unable to fulfill your responsibilities in a professional manner?
I conducted myself as honorably and as faithfully as anyone will provide.
Let's talk a little bit about your brother David, and I'm very sorry to bring this up. Ms. Craig's testimony was that she wasn't really very familiar with the fact that you even had a brother. Is it safe to say that your relationship with your brother was strained?
No, I think it's fair to say that there are private matters that I kept private and workplace matters that I kept to the workplace. And her knowledge of my brother was not through any lack of closeness between my relationship with my brother. It was a matter between us.
So the fact that you hadn't shared a great deal of detail about your brother's final illness wasn't indicative of any great emotional burden?
No, it was something that it was my way for me to take care of this matter myself and not to share it with my staff and my people.
Let's move forward to your conversation with Ms. Cregg, where you revealed that you were the source. The government suggests that this was a confession of an illegal act. What was it for you?
For me, it was fulfilling the greater responsibility of the lives and safety of American citizens. And for me, it was providing a viable solution to the president for a dilemma that posed posed a political problem, and I believe that I served the president by giving him an adequate alternative to this issue.
Nothing further.
Cross.
Good evening, Mr. Ziegler.
Good evening.
I do want to express regret at your brother David's passing.
Thank you.
And in regards to David, you mentioned that you did have a relatively positive relationship with David, all things considered.
Yes.
Did you love your brother?
Yes, I did.
And when you did find out about his passing, how did you feel?
I felt great pain in that he was suffering through his illness and that there was nothing that I could do for him that anyone could do for him.
Absolutely. And can you tell me how you were coping with that emotional weight while you were working at the White House at this time in regards to saving these 3 astronauts?
1 minute, Counsel.
I was coping with by throwing myself into my work and doing my work as best as I could and serving the president and the president's needs.
Were you possibly upset enough at your brother that you would consider going against his wishes in order to save these astronauts when you knew he wouldn't do so?
No, my regard for my brother and my brother's wishes was a separate matter from the urgency of saving people who were alive who needed rescuing.
One more question. During this time, you did have a physical altercation with Joshua Lyman,
Objection.
correct?
Basis.
Prior bad acts, Judge. Same objection as earlier.
This current bad act went along with the current case that the White House was working on these astronauts. They happened at the exact same time.
I'll sustain the objection. Next question. Final question.
Did you express any anger or outbursts of emotion towards your coworkers at this time?
Unfortunately, Your Honor, there have been occasions where I've expressed anger over the day-to-day operations because every day brings a piece of news that we have to contain. I would say that this particular matter is no different in that regard than any other.
Thank you. Nothing further.
Thank you, Mr. Ziegler. You are excused. State, I'll hear from you in closing.
Thank you to Mr. Ziegler and to all of the witnesses. In closing, I do want to speak to the fact that Toby Ziegler was juggling a lot at this time. As has been said, the White House was incredibly understaffed. Mr. Ziegler had lost his deputy communications director. His press secretary had been promoted to chief of staff. And he was handling this death of his brother that directly coincided with the danger that these astronauts were in on this space shuttle. All of that together could certainly cloud any person's better judgment and make them emotional under any circumstances. And we're all human, we're not perfect. Mr. Ziegler is no exception. So I'd like you to put yourself in his shoes for a moment. He didn't get to spend a lot of time with his brother because of both of their work schedules. He could have expected that after his time at the White House, which was coming to an end soon after, that he would get to spend more time with his family. And the fact that his brother did pass could have led Mr. Ziegler to commit an act that he wouldn't otherwise do. He has been said to be an honorable and ethical man. No one is questioning that. But it was a very emotional time for him. And it is possible that it's possible that his emotion could have led him to commit this act, and instead of putting his co-worker, Ms. Cregg, through the stress of this any longer, he wanted to come out and confess, which was a very courageous act. Thank you.
Defense?
Well, here we are again. At the beginning, I told you that the government was telling a very nice little story. And they have, in fact, told a nice story. And they matched all the pieces together to take you from point A to point B to point C, from their allegations through Ms. Cregg's testimony, through Mr. Brock's admission for the first time that Mr. Ziegler was in fact the lead. But I would like to remind you of a few salient facts. First is Mr. Ziegler's not under any obligation to persuade you. It's the government's responsibility to persuade you. It's the government's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Mr. Ziegler was in fact the lead. I'd like to remind you that 2 of the government's witnesses benefited tremendously by Mr. Ziegler's so-called confession. Because of his so-called confession, Ms. Cregg was able to tie the leak problem up in a nice little political knot and move on to the business of the day. Because of his so-called confession, Mr. Brock was released from any further ramifications of his contempt of a federal court. So, with all due respect to the government's witnesses, I think we need to remind ourselves that these folks benefited from what happened. And with the acknowledgement of the benefits that they reap, I think you might find that their testimony's a little bit incredible. As I said at the beginning, Mr. Ziegler is known for his devotion and pursuit of many a lost cause. He is a team player. He was not the leak. Thank you.
Thank you, defense. All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I will allow you 5 minutes to deliberate and talk amongst yourselves. I will call you back to order when your deliberation time has passed.
That's true. But it does make
justice up there by saying he did it to protect the administration. Just a thought.
All right, we're back on the record. In the United States of America versus Ziegler. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'm going to ask you now to vote by a show of hands. Those of you casting votes for the prosecution, meaning you believe that Mr. Ziegler is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of the charges, please raise your hands now.
Get the cricket back.
Based on the show or based on?
Yeah, based on today, right?
Yeah. There's no other evidence than what has been placed before you today. With that being said, does that change anybody's vote?
Just Tara, hold my hand.
I would like to raise my hand, but only because he's a Yankees fan.
Go Red Sox!
For all of you American League East fans in the room, I am unfortunately an Orioles fan. You should feel sorry.
I'm a Mets fan, I feel your pain.
Brian Huck wore your uniform. Feel vindicated.
All right, ladies and gentlemen of the jury who believe that Mr. Ziegler should be acquitted of the charges, meaning that the state did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt. You're not on that jury. Put one over on me, counselor. You'll be hearing from bar counselor. All right. Well, Mr. Ziegler, it appears that you are free to go. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury